Today I'll be reviewing the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 STM, one of my favorite lenses, also known as the nifty-fifty. If you're on the hunt for a versatile lens that can work wonders in various photography scenarios, then you're in the right place. We're going to be diving into the features, capabilities, sample images, and video, and quirks of this lens to help you decide if it's the perfect addition to your photography camera bag. From portraits that pop with stunning bokeh to navigating challenging lighting situations, this lens has some impressive tricks up its sleeve. But of course, no lens is without its unique character and limitations. So join me as we uncover the secrets of this lens, and by the end of this video, you'll have a better idea on whether or not this lens is your ideal photography companion. Let's kick things off by talking about the focal length. Now, this lens is a prime lens with a fixed focal length of 50mm, but what's cool is that it's versatile enough to work on both full frame and APS-C crop sensor cameras. So if you're using it on a full frame camera, you get that classic 50mm field of view, and that's your true focal length, and it offers a standard perspective without any cropping. But here's where it gets a little interesting. When you pop this lens onto an APS-C crop sensor camera, you get a 1.6 times crop factor. So essentially your effective field of view becomes narrower due to that crop factor. So with this 1.6 times crop factor, for instance, your 50mm lens suddenly starts to act more like an 80mm lens in terms of field of view. It's like getting that extra zoom without changing your lens. So to sum it up, when you're using this lens on a full frame camera, it's a crisp 50mm, but when you slap it on to a crop sensor camera, you get a 1.6 times crop sensor, and that 50mm really turns into like an 80mm focal length. Alright, let's talk about one of my favorite things when it comes to photography, the aperture of this lens. First off, this lens boasts a wide maximum aperture of f1.8. Why is that great? Well, it's perfect for giving your shots that dreamy, shallow depth of field, and quality shallow depth of field leads to that gorgeous background blur, also known as bokeh, that's so popular. Plus, it's a lifesaver when you're shooting in low light conditions. And the minimum aperture on the lens is f22, allowing you to capture a deep depth of field, allowing you to have the foreground and the background in sharp focus. Now, what makes this lens even more impressive is its circular aperture with 7 rounded blades. So what does that mean for your photos? It means your bokeh game is going to be on point. With those 7 blades, you'll get super smooth and soft bokeh. And when you're shooting wide open at f1.8 or maybe f2.8, you'll notice that soft, rounded background blur. This is especially fantastic for things like portraits, headshots, product shots, or any situation really where you want your subject to really pop against that beautifully blurred backdrop. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Canon EF 50mm 1.8's focus mechanism. So this lens comes equipped with a stepping motor, or STM for short. So you might be thinking, okay, what's special about it? Well, it's all about delivering smooth and whisper quiet autofocus. And why does that matter? Well, imagine you're filming a video or snapping pics in a quiet spot. You don't really want your camera's motor noise to be ruining the show, right? Now, when it comes to this STM motor, I have to really be honest here. Even though it has the STM, it's not entirely noiseless when it's focusing. I actually recorded a bit of that motor noise so you can hear it for yourself. But hey, here's the silver lining. The autofocus is smooth as silk. It locks onto your subjects like a pro, which makes it perfect for those quick focus adjustments, whether you're filming or taking photos. And for those of you who prefer the old school manual approach, this lens has manual focus as well. So you can switch over to manual focus mode and fine-tune your shots with ease. What's even cooler is the manual focus override. You can tweak your focus manually even when you're in autofocus mode. It's like having the best of both worlds. Oh, and when you're in manual focus mode, you have a really smooth manual focus ring. Trust me, if you use manual focus a lot, this focus ring is a game changer and it'll really enhance your experience. Now let's take a closer look at the optical design of this lens. The optical design is really what makes your photos really shine. Inside this lens, you've got 6 lens elements carefully arranged into 5 groups. These elements are like the wizards behind the curtain, bending and focusing incoming light to create those sharp, stunning images. Each group has its own set of elements with their own unique properties. Some might be aspherical, some low dispersion, all working together to tackle things like chromatic aberration and spherical aberration. Speaking of aspherical elements, there's at least one in the mix here. These little gems can help squash those spherical aberrations that can mess with your image quality, especially at the edges of your shots. It's all about sharper, clearer images. Let's talk coatings. This lens features Canon Super Spectra coating. It nips those annoying reflections in the bud and keeps flares at bay, even when you're shooting in tricky lighting conditions. You can see for yourself how it handles flares. Chromatic aberration. The design here is all about minimizing that color fringing and unwanted color dispersion that can sneak into your photos. If you're into architecture or product photography, you'll love this. The lens design also tackles distortion. Those straight lines in your shots stay perfectly straight, no burrowing or curving here. I didn't notice any crazy distortion with this lens, plus most editing software have profile corrections that will allow you to just adjust for this distortion, so this isn't really something you should worry about with this lens. It's time to check out what this lens is made of. It's not just about the glass, you know, the construction materials matter too. So the lens barrel itself is mostly made out of high quality plastic. So what does that mean for you? Well, it keeps the whole lens super lightweight, which is a big plus, especially if you're out and about capturing moments all day long. And here's the kicker, that plastic construction is part of what makes this lens so affordable. So you're getting quality without breaking the bank. Now let's talk about the mount. It's not just any mount, it's a metal lens mount. And why does that matter? Well, for one, durability. You want that lens securely and precisely attached to your camera, especially if you're swapping lenses on the go. The focus ring, it's made out of plastic too, but don't let that fool you. It has a textured surface that feels great on your fingers, and it's as smooth as butter. When you're manual focusing, there's no problems. And last but not least, the filter thread. It's got a standard 49mm size, just like many other Canon lenses. That's where you can attach all your fancy filters, like UV filters, polarizers, or ND filters. And the filter thread is usually made of metal, so you can trust it to hold those filters securely in place with no accidental drops. So something to know about this lens as well is that it's not your all-weather buddy. What does that mean? Well, it's not really designed to take a beating from dust, moisture, or any other of Mother Nature's surprises. So if you're the adventurous type and you find yourself in tricky weather situations, you have to be careful. If you're constantly in the line of fire, facing rain, dust, or other challenging conditions, my advice is to simply just take the necessary precautions. Grab yourself a dedicated rain cover for your camera and lens, and it'll act more like an umbrella for your gear. Since this lens doesn't have any weather sealing, you can keep them safe and sound, and they'll thank you by lasting longer and staying in tip-top shape. Now let's talk about one of the things I love most about this lens, its weight. The Canon EF 50mm f1.8 is a featherweight champion, tipping the scales at just around 5.6 ounces, which is roughly 160 grams. And here's the kicker, even if you deck it out with some cool accessories or filters, it's still one of the lightest lenses out there. Alright, let's talk about image stabilization, or in this case, the lack of it. So this lens doesn't come with built-in image stabilization, or IS for short. That means it doesn't have those fancy optical tricks to smooth out camera shakes or vibrations. If you find yourself in low light situations or need to use slower shutter speeds, you've got some options. You can crank up the ISO, but keep in mind that higher ISO can introduce noise to your shots. Alternatively, you can bust out the tripod, and that's the tried and true way to keep your images razor sharp. Now let's talk video. If you're filming and you don't have a tripod handy, you might end up with some shaky footage. But don't fret, there are plenty of stabilization plugins and nifty software out there for video editing that can help you in post-production. Alright, now it's time to talk about the real deal, the image quality of this lens. And trust me, it doesn't disappoint. First up, portrait photography. When it's all about that creamy background blur, this lens with its wide f1.8 aperture is your secret weapon. You can create stunning bokeh that effortlessly isolates your subject. That's why it's a go-to choice for those professional looking portraits and headshots. Now for the street photographers out there, this lens is a dream. It's compact, lightweight, and quick on the autofocus. Just a heads up though, if you're in a super quiet spot, the autofocus noise might give you away. So just keep that in mind. Low light environments, no problem. Whether you're at a concert, at night, the wide f1.8 aperture comes to the rescue. It soaks up light like a sponge, ensuring sharp shots even in challenging lighting conditions. Just watch out for high ISO noise on some cameras. When it comes to product photography, sharpness and background blur are your best friends. Well, this lens delivers on both fronts. With that wide aperture, you can highlight product details while beautifully blurring the background. It's like magic for your product shots. When it comes to landscape photography, it's not the first lens that comes to mind, but it can still pull its weight. While it won't give you jaw-dropping landscapes, its sharpness and contrast can capture those intricate landscape details. It's a decent option in a pinch. Now, for macro photographers, this lens isn't a dedicated macro lens, but you can use extension tubes to get those macro-like shots. Personally, if you're diving deep into macro photography, I think it does a decent job, but if you're really trying to get into the field, I'd recommend grabbing a dedicated macro lens as it'll be worth it. Alright, now let's chat about the video quality you can expect from this lens. It's pretty much on par with the image quality, but there are a couple things to keep in mind. The first is the fixed focal length. So this lens doesn't zoom in or out. So to change your framing, you've got to put those leg muscles to work and physically move yourself and move with your camera. It's worth noting that this can be a bit limiting if you're in a situation where you need to quickly adjust your focal length. So if zooming is your thing, you might want to consider just getting a dedicated zoom lens. Next up, image stabilization, or in this case, the lack of it. Without built-in image stabilization, getting very steady footage right out of the camera can be a bit of a challenge. Now, don't worry, it's not impossible. You can still achieve that smooth cinematic look with the help of a tripod, gimbal, or any other stabilized surface. But if you're looking for mobility and to capture video on the move, it might be a little bit more effort. I also put this lens through the paces at different f-stop ranges for video, so let's take a look at those results. Now let's talk about the low light wizardry of this lens. The low light capabilities of this lens is very impressive, all thanks to its wide aperture. Having a lens with wide aperture like this one is like having a secret weapon against noise in your images or footage. It allows you to use faster shutter speeds and lower ISO settings, resulting in less grainy, cleaner shots. But here's the real deal. In those ultra dark situations, even this lens has its limits. If your camera isn't great with high ISO, you might still end up with some noise in your shots. I also noticed that the autofocus can get a little jittery in extremely dim settings. So if you run into this issue, don't hesitate to switch over to manual focus for that extra precision. I put this lens through the paces at different f-stop ranges in low light, so let's take a look at those results. Overall, this lens performs well at all f-stop ranges. You'll notice some noise at higher f-stop ranges because the sun was starting to go down. So here's my final pros and cons table for this lens. The pros include wide aperture, it's very light, has quick autofocus, and it produces very sharp images. The cons include no image stabilization, no weather sealing, and a noisy autofocus. And there you have it. We've taken a deep dive into the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 STM lens. This lens is a versatile powerhouse, excelling in different photography niches. Whether you're into portraits, street photography, or tackling low-light environments, it's got your back. Thanks for joining me on this lens adventure. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in purchasing this lens, there's an affiliate link down below in the description box that'll go towards helping support the channel. Until next time, keep capturing those unforgettable moments, and may your lenses always bring your visions to life. Thanks for watching.